We are now live. Good afternoon and welcome to Synopsis ARCAthens Virtual Residency 5. We are going to give you 1 minute to connect and settle in comfortably as we are going to spend approximately 1 hour together. While we are admitting our guests, please tell us in the Zoom chat or in the Facebook comment section from where you're tuning in and how you feel. So for one, I'm feeling very exciting to be with you today. I have followed the conversation of AVR5 during their 4-week exchange on Instagram, and I'm expecting an equally interesting live discussion. So I'm seeing Lisa saying that she's at the Upper East Side, Manhattan, and she's grateful to be here. Grace is at Iowa. And Reed is in Brooklyn and looking forward to hearing from you all today. Alicia in the Long Island, Nancy in Los Angeles, Celia in Brooklyn. We have a really good crowd today. So now that we have the first minute going on and you're all in, I think it's time to welcome everybody. I'm Eleni Sideri, independent curator and previous AVR fellow. My skin is white, my hair is curly and brown, so are my eyes, and I wear a colorful shirt with flowers. I will facilitate today's conversation, and I'm happy to be here with Aristides Logothetis, director of ARCAthens, and the fellows, the curator Lydia and the artists LeSeur and Maria Sideri, and Andres, who kindly agreed to support us today. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. This program is recorded and will become available on ARCAthens website soon. This program is broadcasted live on our Facebook page. We encourage you to keep your camera and acknowledge the presence of the people in this virtual space. Nevertheless, if you don't feel comfortable, you can turn your camera off. Please mute yourselves when you don't speak. You can activate the closed caption by clicking on the CC button of the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom application. You can leave your comments on Zoom or Facebook chat. Myself and Andres will get back to you shortly. You can type your questions in the Zoom chat box and Facebook comment section. We'll try to address as many as we can during the Q&A at the end of the program. You can unmute yourselves or we will read the question for you, whatever feels good. If you decide to unmute, please start with your name and pronouns and be mindful of the time. We're trying to create a safe space. Please be respectful and kind to each other. And at the end of the meeting, we will post a survey about the quality of the program. Thank you. Aristides, now you have the floor.
Thank you, Eleni, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our 5th Synopsis, the culminating event for the ARCAthens Virtual Residency, a program we started in 2020 as a response to the pandemic and social distancing, and also as an effort for ARCAthens to expand our digital support of artists, curators, and scholars beyond our physical residencies. The concept of the AVR of the ARCAthens Virtual Residency is for ARCAthens to nominate a curator, in this case, Lydia Matthews, who then researches and selects 2 artists, one from Greece, in this case, Maria Sideri, and the other in the Bronx, in this case, LeSeur, who then engage in a visual conversation, taking over the ARCAthens Instagram account and taking turns posting images of their work daily, creating a visual and narrative dialogue expressing their concerns during this moment in time. The curator caps the week with an Instagram live curatorial reflection. This you can see play out on our Instagram page, but we have a dedicated page on our website also for all our virtual residencies. And you can see all of the images, the curatorial reflections, and soon this synopsis uploaded on that. I'm so excited to introduce you to the curator, Lydia Matthews. Lydia is a Brooklyn and Athens-based curator, writer, educator, and MFA co-director in the Fine Arts program at Parsons School of Design and founding director of the Curatorial Design Research Lab, which spans various colleges across the New School in New York City. A dual citizen of the US and Greece, Lydia trained in contemporary modern art history at the University of California, Berkeley, and University of London's Courtauld Institute, and has held academic positions in New York, San Francisco, and at the University of Thessaly in Volos, Greece. Her work explores how contemporary artists, artisans, and designers foster critical democratic debates and intimate community interactions in the public sphere, often in a response to a variety of urgent global and local conditions in their daily lives. Matthews' essays have appeared in numerous journals, books, and exhibition catalogs, and she has lectured internationally on socially engaged art, craft, and design practices. Curatorial projects include art exhibitions, walking events, community-based urban festivals, and multidisciplinary pedagogical exchanges addressing ecological and social sustainability. Lydia has been commissioned by the Fulbright Foundation, NEM Foundation, CEC Arts Link, Open Society Foundation, Trust for Mutual Understanding, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, the Emirates Sinan Foundation, and the US Embassy in Georgia, the country. Lydia will be moderating this presentation, and without further ado, Lydia Matthews.
Thank you so much, Aristides, and really thank you to the whole ARCAthens team, Eleni and Paula and Andres and everybody else who's been involved. It's been an incredible privilege and challenge, wonderful challenge to do this virtual residency. As Aristides said, you know, I make both Greece and the US, New York, my home. So I'm a bit like an echo of ARCAthens, I guess. And I do that because my parents came from Greece and immigrated to New York City during the Greek Civil War. So I guess you could say a lot of my practice stems from kind of being a child of a particular kind of trauma. I am going to share my screen so that I can just give you a little bit of a glimpse of what a couple of recent projects, so you can see a little bit more about where I'm coming from and how I work. Let me just put this up for you. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. So, one of the things that I often do when I'm curating is I'm very interested in what Giorgio Agamben calls the beam of darkness. In other words, not the things that are lit very brightly and grab your attention, but the things that kind of lurk underneath the surface, or things that we overlook typically, things that we devalue or choose to ignore, either out of ignorance or convenience. And I've always been very interested in these kinds of shadowed histories, forms of knowledge, people and communities or places. And I feel like the work that I can do often will make those shadowed sites and individuals more visible through cultural projects. I'm really interested then in how that visibility can emerge and then kind of provoke a more urgent and collective interest. So often my projects involve counter narratives, producing them, gathering stories that challenge unjust systems or just try to fill in the gaps produced by historical amnesia. But the way I do this is really never as a solo individual, but rather I'm very interested in collaboration. I strongly believe in collective wisdom, and especially the kind that can be generated by bringing people together, often people who don't know each other or who are just for the first time working, to share the experience of co-creating something together. So hopefully you can hear some echoes of why this ARCAthens virtual residency was so interesting to me. So collaboration, the best projects for me start with curiosity. I start with a question. I always ask permission if I can pursue and research that question from the communities that I engage with. And I see it really as an opportunity to deepen a relationship, a personal relationship, a friendship through the act of culture making. I also really trust in the local, and I believe in making projects that are very site specific. And I love it when I go into something and I have no idea what's going to come of it. So that openness to the unknown and new forms of knowledge production are really what are at the heart of what I do. So what that means is that oftentimes I'm less interested in necessarily designing exhibitions than I am in designing dialogical platforms. So I'm co-curating oftentimes with local counterparts who I see as equal partners in decision making, and I do this in order not just to helicopter in and then fly out, but rather to develop a sustained collaborative relationship over time. So I wanted to show you a couple of recent projects. One that I just did in May, or this whole last year in Porto, Portugal, with the artists Alfredo Jar and Susan Meiselas for the Porto Photo Biennial, the Biennale there. And this project was called, I don't know if you can see it, might be a little obscured, but it was called Travessia Mushima, which were the names of the two projects by Alfredo and Susan. And this whole project was really motivated by the questions that were alive for me when I was in the lockdown in Brooklyn in May of 2020. And George Floyd's murder had just happened. The streets really were on fire, and a huge number of us were out marching. And I was curious when I got this commission to do the project in Porto. Soon after this moment, I moved to my home in Athens. So I was curious about how Europe was responding to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I also was very curious about how Portugal was dealing with its colonial legacy, and whether it was possible at all to make a socially engaged documentary project during a global pandemic with 3 different time zones, me in Athens, Susan in New York, and then our partners on the ground, or who would become our partners on the ground in Porto. So when I first started thinking about those questions, I immediately thought about Alfredo Jar's really beautiful piece, Mushima, that I had seen about 15 years earlier. And that was pretty easy to, kind of ask Alfredo to present his work, which is looking at the aftermath of colonialism in Angola through songs. But the more challenging piece of this was to try to do something on the ground that was socially engaged. So that was Susan Meiselas's project, and you can see all of our collaborators here. I'm just going to breeze through so you get a sense of it. The first thing we did when we started to think about how we would go about asking about the Black Lives Matter movement in Portugal in Porto, was to ask for help. Asked to speak with people who knew what was going on. We were first introduced to people at the university, Lydia Ferro, who then introduced us to 2 of her graduate students, one of whom was Dorian Negro, and everything was happening on Zoom. Bia was the other one here. And very quickly, we created a whole kind of network where I brought in Susan, we went to Lydia brought us to Dori, Bia, Ishmael, Donna Claudia, and you can see that what happened was an organic network of dialogues began to happen when people took us to introduce us to other people. Dory is a performance artist and immediately made a map for us of his experience of the city of Porto. And that gave us the idea to use the map as the grounding for this. And also to take what was available about information on the Black associations in Porto and compare that with the local knowledge in people like Dona Claudia, who's been working as an activist for immigration rights for many years. So then the project became about going on these virtual walks. Since we weren't in Porto, we had our partners on the ground take us to the places in the city that they found were most compelling and could tell us the stories of their daily lives. So this is Dory taking us down the street. This is Ishmael taking us to his barbers. Donna Claudia taking us to some of the housing projects and to the community on the outskirts of the city. So in those sites, we were not only talking to people through our phones, but also we had people on the ground photographing as well as videotaping. At some point, we decided, since we were putting things in a show, we needed to capture these stories more materially. So we did a workshop, and people came from the community and annotated photographs for us. And it told us the stories of their lives in Porto. Now, many of these people had never met one another. They really came from different groups. The community is very dispersed throughout the city. We also then, since we couldn't touch headphones or do anything like that because of COVID in the gallery, we created a QR system which would take us to these triggers where you would then be able to see the videos that were associated with the photographs. So, and we had objects as well that were linked to the stories. So really what this was about was creating a site, again, a platform for the stories to be held and for people to gather and begin to compare stories, to provide information for the sociologists who were at the university working, and also to meet one another. It really was about listening deeply and hearing each other's experiences. We were just there to facilitate that. And then very briefly, I'm going to show you one quick other project that I did in the south of Greece, in the Peloponnese, at the same time, actually, last year, which was a project that I did with my collaborator, Fotis Flavatomos, who is a low vision artist and works a lot with the Benaki Museum doing programming for blind and low visioned people. So we decided to do a project that focused on the Patrick Lee Fermer House, which is now the Benaki Museum in the Peloponnese in the Mani region, and to think about the legacy of Patrick Lee Fermer, who was an amazing travel writer who lived in the region from, for many, many years with his photographer wife, Joan. And they made this their home, and they were very beloved by the local people. But after they died, the house became a museum. It was restored. And so what our questions driving this was, how can we take the cultural legacy of Fermer, who was now being forgotten by the younger generation, and make it more accessible to the local community, both the blind community and the younger people? And how could we create something that would embody the legacy to make it more memorable through performance? So that was our starting place. And then we found our collaborators, not only the blind community, but the Cardamili High School students and a local cultural ecological organization, Nartura. We did a series of workshops with them, learning from them, not only about the legacy of Fermer in the region, but also the legacy of the plants and the local indigenous knowledge. And also with the kids from the high school, the blind community, we did workshops with them in advance of our main events to figure out how to shape that. And this, then we brought everybody together, communities that didn't know each other, to explore the house and the grounds with different kinds of multisensory knowledge in place. So the kids went alongside the blind people And we walked through this, it was a participatory walk, lots of different activities with the dancer, the musicians, in different sites, having the kids, every site was inspired by a piece of writing by Fermor. So they wrote a collective poem together. They talked about the way in which they perceived the landscape and the words from their own vantage points. So in this case, there were moments where the blind had people had the advantage because we gave them prompts in Braille. So that was the piece, and I'm realizing that I am gonna now end. I also was gonna show you a piece from Kazakhstan that I did with the artist Jean Finley, but I think what I'll do is just lead you to my website and you can learn more about that. That was another writing workshop with kids in that community, orphans who were aging out of the orphanage, where we were challenging them to imagine their futures through their proximity with the space station in Kazakhstan and imagining themselves, beaming themselves up into another imaginary worlds to begin to think about that process of transition. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I want to introduce to you with great pleasure, the next speaker, one of our fellows, who, and specifically, I'm going to introduce to you Leandra LeSeur. I had the pleasure of meeting Leandra because one of our mutual friends and colleagues told me about her work. And as soon as I saw it and started speaking with her and discovering that she was from the Bronx, I immediately knew that this was the person who was the right fit for this project. And Leandra is a multidisciplinary artist whose work encompasses a range of media, including video, installation, photography, painting, and performance. LeSeur's body of work is a celebration of Blackness, queerness, femininity, and seeks to dismantle systems of power and achieve transcendence and liberation through perseverance. Leandra has received many awards, including the Leslie Lohman Museum's Artist Fellowship Award in 2019, the Time-Based Medium Prize, as well as the juried Grand Prize at Art Prize 10. And her work has she's appeared in conversation with the artist Marilyn Minter at the Brooklyn Museum. She's lectured nationally and now teaches, I'm happy to say, at Parsons, so we're colleagues. Her work has been in solo and group exhibitions at the Shed in New York, at Assembly Room in Manhattan, at Air Gallery and Microscope Gallery in New York, in Atlanta at Atlanta Contemporary and Arnica Dawkins, at the Anacostia Art Center in Washington, D.C., at Site Lab in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and others. And her residencies include the NARS Foundation, the Marble House Project, and Mass MoCA. And Leandra is represented by Marlborough Gallery in New York, and she's going to be having a solo show there opening on May 5th. So those of you who are local, I hope that you'll have a chance to go see her pieces directly. But I'm going to turn the mic over to Leandra. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. My name is Leandra LeSeur. I'm really, really grateful to be here today. Want to take the time to just thank everyone for joining us and being a part of this beautiful conversation and I guess recap of what happened for the past 4 weeks between Maria and I, and Lydia as well. Just really beautiful conversation. I want to share my screen. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my work and practice. Try not to go over my time limit, but I tend to speak for long periods of time. I'm pretty long-winded, so forgive me if I do. All right, hope everyone can see that. So first and foremost, again, just want to thank you all for being here. I want to talk about some of these works will probably be brought back up in discussion. And they also were works that I highlighted on the ARCAthens Instagram and spoke pretty deeply into thinking and process behind the works. So I just want to talk about kind of overarching themes within the works that I've been creating for the past few years, and kind of where I am now and what I'm looking to kind of dive into in future works, and where my thinking is heading. A lot of my work regards the body. I'm thinking a lot about durational aspect of performance. So my work is centered around performance and also video. But within my works, I'm thinking a lot about how the body leaves something to then begin a dialogue and conversation, and as a way to connect with self and also with someone else. This particular piece that you see in this image was a piece I did in 2018 during ARCAthens 10 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The title of the work, Brown, Carmine, and Blue, which I did a durational performance over the course of 2 weeks that I was basically lifting, carrying, painting cinder blocks black, and creating these monolith structures throughout the space. This work was about me thinking about weight and what weight symbolizes for me in my life, thinking about how we hold on to weight, how we carry it, but also thinking about how we can care for the weight that exists within our lives. And in that care, how do we allow that weight to exist beyond us, and not within us, but outside of how we were carrying it within us. And so I lifted close to 300 cinder blocks during this time, was probably, I think, over 3,500 pounds, maybe, if I'm calculating correctly. Was walking through this space. This was actually an abandoned middle school in Grand Rapids that we activated through performance and installation. It was myself and about 10 or 11 other artists in the space. And I wanted to really connect to this space, a space that was outside of the downtown area of Grand Rapids, a community that had been kind of overlooked after the riots that took place in the late 60s. A lot of people talk about what took place in Detroit, but they tend to forget the things that happened in other sites. And Grand Rapids was one of those, where there was an influx of Black and Hispanic residents that came into this area. And as that happened, they started shutting down specific like educational institutions and just resources that was available in that area. So this building sat dormant for years and years and years. So thinking about that historical context, thinking about the racial context, obviously, within that space, but also thinking about how I was navigating that space, as a Black body. And also thinking about, again, this weight that I was carrying with me as I was navigating this space. So in this performance, thinking about how I could connect to that space, walking barefoot, connecting and feeling the rhythm of that space, allowing that space to speak to me in the exchange of energy, and also making sure that I had a full range of touch with the material, with the cinder blocks, like actually bare hand holding and holding on to that material, holding on to that weight, but also allowing myself to care for something that was kind of holding me down in a way. So outside of this act that I was doing over the course of this period of time, which is something I tend to think about, I always like to think about what is left behind, thinking about the remnants that come from the actual act of performing, the gesture that comes from performing. And so was building monolithic structures throughout that space in 2018, and decided to recreate that monolith in a space at Marlborough Gallery last summer for a group show titled Wild at Heart. In this particular work, as you encounter it, you're also hearing a sound of me recreating. So you're hearing these kind of cinder blocks screeching together as I'm moving them and pushing them and kind of aligning them together so they fit into this like tall 8-foot structure. So my work is really about the way in which the body interacts with space, interacts with material.
How's Candy? She's better.
Interacts with interacts with material, but also interacts with others, and what is left behind in that interaction and that participation. And so in this particular piece, thinking about this remnant that came of it, but also the sound piece that allows a viewer and audience, I'm inviting them into maybe what has taken place that they weren't maybe able to experience, but also allowing them to kind of create their own dialogue and perception of how they're also interacting with the space around them as well. This work, I wanted to show it just because I'm also thinking about remnant outside of actual material. I mean, material can exist, but can a remnant actually exist as something that isn't that tangible? And even if it is tangible, can it create some sort of connection and communication that allows for an extended type of dialogue? And so in this particular work, which I titled Rhythm Studies, I was really focused on allowing my body to move unrestricted, to move freely, allowing my body to kind of speak, to create a new language through this gestural act that my body was taking on without restriction, without thought, and creating these paintings, numerous paintings from it, which I was titling Rhythm Study 1, Rhythm Study 2, this becoming kind of a remnant of a performance action that was taking place in the privacy of my studio. In this act, I had music playing, so sound and rhythm became really important in the way that I was communicating, in the way that I was allowing my body to create a new language. And really focused on asking a question of like, how in the absence of my physical presence, can I still invite someone to connect to my lived experience? So through this and through this like creation of a visual language, are you able to speak to me and really understand the experience and what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to portray in regards to the things that I've experienced, how my body has had to navigate space and how my body has had to navigate the understanding of its presence. As I stated earlier, I mean, obviously performance has been a major part of my practice, but also the creation of video works, specifically multi-channel video works, has been another huge point for my practice. I tend to think of video as a documentation of performance. So it becomes, the actual camera becomes a documentarian. I think a lot about the way that the Black body has become spectacle, specifically in visual media. I mean, if you think about today, every single time that you've heard of any type of violent act against the Black body, you're able to see it and experience it in real time on your phones, on your laptops, in the privacy of your own home, able to take in the violence that is continuously perpetuated and the violence that is enacted against Black bodies and specifically also Black queer bodies. So I wanted to think about how I could kind of navigate that and take more agency over the way that my body is seen, over the way my body is felt in a space. And so video has allowed me to really kind of control that narrative, to allow myself to be seen outside of the violence, allow myself to be seen in a beautiful way. A lot of the performances I do, I ask myself a question before I actually do the performance, whether this is something that is going to be seen by a live audience or something that I need to do in the privacy of my own home or studio, allowing me to kind of curate the way in which my presence is experienced. So this particular piece was a piece where I was thinking about that, wanting to respond specifically to sound and rhythm. I was thinking about historical context, Nawa tradition and ceremony, and thinking about the ways in which that has carried over into Black house music, Black gospel music, and even jazz. And so creating a soundscape, thinking about those specific instruments, rhythms and sounds that kind of came from Nawa, and also pushing it into an original soundscape, that I was creating, and allowing my body to kind of flow and move freely in my own space to kind of respond to that rhythm. Like, what is my body speaking to? What is my body saying? And how am I creating this kind of visual language through that? And also thinking about with video, wanting to change the way we perceive visuals, not as something that you see just clearly on a wall or on a device, but something that is kind of in the round. So you walk into the space and you're embraced by the visual, not just actually looking at it and, you know, kind of spectating, but you as a viewer questioning how you are participating within that kind of viewing experience, you actually also becoming a part of the piece and an active participant, in the work. So how are you also responding to this call that I'm putting out? And also thinking about within the aspect of creating video works, I really love to think about duration, really forcing the viewer to think about, again, how they're participating in this act of viewing. Again, thinking about visual media and also the tools that we use in order to create visual media, the camera becoming a tool that actually has a violent history, and how it has shaped the way that we view Blackness in a sense. And so I'm really trying to turn the lens around and really questioning like in the way in which we intake. And so a lot of the works that I create are long in their format. So this particular piece was about 24 minutes. So really questioning, like, are you able to kind of sit with these acts that I'm going through, these durational, repetitive, mundane acts that I'm processing through these visuals. And also in these visuals, there are moments where there's extreme silence that takes place. So really pushing kind of this discomfort onto the viewer in the same way that I have kind of lost my comfort in the way that my body has become this spectacle. So video and performance has allowed me to really question, again, the way in which we view, and the way in which we take in, and the way in which we connect, and also the way in which we kind of speak to self and also speak to one another. And the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly, and this is something I'll end with, was language and how that has been a huge part of my practice. I've thought a lot about the ways in which language has been very much so restricting in how I've been able to express. There are so many different standards around how we should speak and how we should present when we think about language. And so I wanted to think about ways in which I could refuse that. This was kind of the start to that journey, this piece, There Are Other Hues of Blue, which started off as a durational performance where I would sit with my back towards the audience to create this kind of barrier, and also to make sure that I was creating a safe space where I could speak freely. And for 70 minutes in this durational performance, I performed and literally just spoke freely, words that had been written in my notes on my phone, notebooks that I had everywhere in my home, and just put these words together and realized there was some sort of rhythm there and some sort of connection that really cycled. It was words around rage. Every time I felt angry, I wrote. Every time I felt sad, I wrote. Every time I felt joy, I wrote. And thinking about how that continuous act of writing allowed me to process those feelings and be able to have a better understanding of how I was being present with myself in those moments. So this particular piece, again, started off as this kind of performance. But when the pandemic happened, I started thinking about, okay, obviously, like we can't be present together in the same space. So how does this work exist without me actually physically being there? And that's where this piece, which turned into a 6-channel video piece, came about. So There Are Other Hues of Blue still exists as a performance and still exists as something that I would love to continue to do in public spaces, these readings where I'm just reciting words that mean so much, but it also now exists in this digital form. And just a little brief history about how this work came about, outside of the thinking around the pandemic and how this work exists outside of me physically being present. This was around the time, again, where George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, a lot of that conversation was happening around the violence against Black bodies, the uprisings were taking place. And there were multiple other murders that were taking place. One in particular that was something that really, really bothered me was a murder that happened in Indianapolis. Gentleman Sean Reed was on Facebook Live when it took place. And as he's running from the police, he has his front camera facing him. And when the actual act happened, when he was unfortunately killed by the police, the camera drops. Obviously, you hear his body drop. And as you're watching the Facebook Live video, you hear the sound of the officers talking over his dead body and saying some pretty grotesque things about him in that moment. But you also see this visual where the front camera is looking up at the blue sky. And all you see is this blue that's kind of taking place in the Facebook Live. And it's this really weird experience that you're having. And I remember the first time I watched it, my body felt overheated. And it was this kind of same experience that I have every time I see something that is, again, speaking to this direct violence that's taking place. But I remember, and I don't know why I did this, I replayed the video. And as I replayed it, I remember looking directly at this small corner in the right top-hand corner of the video. As the lens is looking up, a flare of light or the sun hits the front lens, and the lens flare creates this various shade of blue that continues. So you're seeing these like purple blues, these like white blues, these yellow blues, these pink blues that are just kind of coming up. And I remember just like being fixated on that moment and feeling my body transcend from this rage into this beautiful moment of peace. And that clicked for me that that's exactly how we continue on beyond these moments of violence, is we look for moments that we have with peace and joy and love. And even though those words seem so simple when you state them out loud, that act of transforming rage and violence into something quite beautiful is for me something that has felt very radical within the way that I've been able to process and the way that I've been able to move forward. So I wanted to bring that into a work, thinking about this transformation. And that's how this came about, me taking that moment, recording it, and then also putting it up. So when you walk into the space, you're kind of looking up at these various shades of blue. And the words that I spoke in this durational performance are the words that you hear over this visual as you experience this work. And as Lydia mentioned, I have a show coming up in Marlborough where this will be the work that will be displayed. So if anyone's available in New York, it will be opening on May 5th, and I hope that you'll be able to experience it. The last thing I wanted to do before I end is I wanted to speak some of those words in this digital space, just to leave you all with some of the things that have continuously gotten me through a lot of different moments. And these are also words that I did in a performance that I titled Breathing, that took place again at that show at Marlborough last summer called Wild at Heart, where I stood on a cinder block for 2 hours straight and continuously recited words. The words were not just words or language or poetry, they became song. They became kind of like a crying out, and they became a part of my breath. So I just wanted to read a few of those words to you before I end. Freedom like a breath, freedom like a wave, freedom like the sky, all blue, all capable of rebirth. I have no known recollection of blue breath, but I find my soul to be blue, therefore the things that I excrete are of that color. See, freedom to me is that color. When I look up, when I'm met with water, when I appreciate my breathing, I appreciate life. I appreciate the blues. I appreciate the tradition. I appreciate the reflection of myself within these things. My Blackness, though darker, it glows in its presence. Therefore, I do know what to do with my freedom. My freedom is within the blues. I'm blue black, just black, nothing more. See, we all carry blues. It's how we interpret these blues that bring out different hues. See, I've been transforming in transition. I've experienced enough to understand the presence of my body. My soul has expanded its capacity to hold room for his presence. How can I exist without soul? See, I've rushed to understand things that took time to build. My being is here right now in this moment. And on days I feel the need to see past this moment, I reflect. I've died many times, but what is death when life doesn't hold value? I've died many times, but what is death when life doesn't hold value? I've died many times, but what is death when life doesn't hold value? See, death by way of a beat, birth by way of a rhythm. Is your spirit awake, she asked? Is your spirit awake, she asked? Is your spirit awake, she asked? Every time I look up, there's a sparkle in your eyes, a know-how, a glimmer of light. How could I not see you? How could I forget you? Your remnants left, but I remained, and I'm questioning. Won't you come back home, ease my pain, and soothe my tortured soul? Love, 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 and I adore the way that we are. See, you're my sun, and I'm your star. I love you. I love you. I love you. I spoke with God and she asked me if I knew love. She asked me if I felt held. Have you ever seen the sun and the moon in one place? I put my hand out the window. The wind held me like her voice. I'm asking myself, could this be free? Could this be free? I'm asking myself, could this be free? I sometimes wonder what the effects of love can do to a body that has yet to feel it. See, I think about cycles. I think about time. As a child, hearing the echoes of a melody that went something like, time is just a rose, just a song. Time just melts, nothing really exists. The things I deemed important, see, they just faded away. Love invades me tenderly like yesterday. It commands me, it burns me. Time is just a rose, just a song. What I wouldn't give to have it here with me again and again and again and again, cycles. Thank you.
Wow, Leandra, thank you. That was yet again another extraordinary gift that you just gave. I think everybody, through your words and through your experiences, thank you. I think you're beginning to understand why every one of these encounters that we've had over the last 4 weeks has just been so rich an experience and so much their own kind of little performative moments. And I've learned so much. So thank you for that. Actually, interestingly, I met Maria Sideri also when we were part of a collective project in Prespa in northern Greece, a walking arts network, where I had the good fortune of hearing Maria present a paper about a project that she had done about her own family and the Greek Civil War, which of course hit me very strongly given my own family history. But it was that act of a performance lecture that also made me understand in that moment that I wanted to work with this woman and I was going to find a way to do it. So again, thank you, ARCAthens, for allowing me to bring these two folks together. Maria Sideri is an artist and a researcher whose practice involves performance, text, voice, and sound. Her artistic research is influenced from her background in anthropology and the history of religion. She's performed and exhibited at Kiev Biennale, Momus museums, and also in 2021, Stavros Niarchos in 19, Phenomenon as a commission from State of Concept in 2021. She was in the 4th biennial in Greece in 2013, and many other festivals, including Trouble Festival, Spill Festival, and others. Parallel to her solo practice, Maria has collaborated as a performer over the last 10 years with various artists internationally, including Ron Athy, Manuel Vasson, Lina Lapalite, Dora Garcia, Tino Segal, and many others, and has been developing community with and youth projects hosted by.
There was a Black artist. This is the artist.
Oh, if you could mute, thank you. In Marseille, also with Signal Festival and Kifas in Brussels, and with Tadamon in Cairo. Maria has been very nomadic over the course of this exchange as well, just having arrived back for the first time in Athens last night. Maria has received fundings from the Arts Council of England for her work Vibrant Matter, and was awarded the Artworks Fellowship in 2018 in Athens. And since March of 2018, she's also been working on a PhD at the University of Western Macedonia in the Department of Applied and Visual Arts. She's also part of an ecofeminist artistic network called Room to Bloom, and a member of a music band called Bora Barks. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the Zoom mic over to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Thank you, Leandra. Thank you, Eleni, Aristides, and everyone else from the ARCAthens team. Hello from Athens. And while I am sharing my screen, I will give you a little bit of background. So, there we are. So my name is Maria Sideri. I am born in Thessaloniki, and since 4 years I'm based in Athens. After 13 years of very nomadic life and working abroad between Geneva, London, and Cairo, in my practice I use performance and sound and text. And I am also, as Lydia said, on the 4th year of my PhD research with the University of Western Macedonia. My artistic practice and my research are very interconnected, and I'm looking at ideas around embodiment and archiving, and I'm investigating more specifically at how to expand our understanding of what and how bodies can archive, but also I am looking at bodies as, at archives as embodied processes, and how to really bring like archival material in front of an audience. So the first work I chose to present for you here, it's a work called Rhizotomicon, and it's part of the project Identity in Between, that was a project conceived by the visual artist Efi Spirou. And in this project, 5 female artists were invited to create performance for the camera on the notion of identity and its multiple reflections. And the performances took place in this very interesting space in Athens, the former airport of Ellinikon. And some part of the project were also these interviews, these different interviews from the artists. So the group videos were shown in Momus, in the museum's Momus of Thessaloniki. And for this work, I drew inspiration specifically from the different herbariums of the Middle Ages. And I really saw these herbariums as archives. And I was very impressed by the different depictions of this plant, but also the different mythological representations. So there were different things that attracted me to work on that. First of all, was the very complex and multiple identity of the plant of the mandrake that combined the toxic and the therapeutic properties, but also something else that had to do more broadly the remains of embodied knowledge and how and the separations between the human and the non-human world. So this plant was very important for my practice somehow, because it worked as a liminal plant, as an example of liminality, and allowed me as well to activate, somehow to bring life to these archival materials, these herbariums, in front of an audience. So these are different parts of the performance, and the chain is also a very characteristic and important element of these representations of the Middle Ages of the plant, because the plant used to be attached through this chain so that the humans would not touch it, and the chain would be attached to a dog, and the dog would had to be left without food for several days, so that then when food was offered to the dog would like pull very hardly the plant out of the earth, and the humans wouldn't have to actually touch it. Because supposedly the plant, when it was touched by a human hand, would had the ability to kill by this very strong noise that would release. Yeah, these are more images of the same work. You can also see a little bit of this of the space there in the former Ellinikon airport in Athens. And the same work was also presented as part of the public visual arts and public art projections in the MOMS museums in Thessaloniki in September 2021. And that was part of the International Fair of Thessaloniki that happens every September. And also it was part of the Film Festival of Thessaloniki, that is a very interesting international film festival that really transforms the city of Thessaloniki. So yeah, here are more pictures of this event. And here I'm sharing another projection of this video work that was part of the Kiev Biennale in October, between October and November 2021. Of course, is a memory that brings a lot of sadness to see that today we were a group of artists that we were invited from Room to Bloom. So Room to Bloom is this collective that I'm part of. It's a network of artists from the geographical periphery of Europe. So there were artists from Sicily, from Poland, from Ukraine, and from Greece. And this program was focusing on post-colonial feminism and ecofeminism, and actually gathered different feminist artists with a migration background here in Athens and then in Palermo. This brings me to another project that I want to share with you today. It's a project, it's a video that I have entitled Valentine. And while I talk with you, I will also share some of it, maybe not all the video, but this video is a tribute to the early 20th century artist named Valentine de Saint-Point. Valentine de Saint-Point was born in Lyon in 1875 and was passed away in Cairo in 1953. And Saint-Point carried out a series of performance experiments in which the female body is shown not as an object of beauty, but as a vehicle of ideas. So in this video, I used a car speaker, and I connected this car speaker to an application, a software that generated various frequencies. And I used a material that was based on cornstarch and water. And this experiment that is very famous of wave physics. So this material is also very interesting because it has this like kind of double agency. So it functions as a liquid and as a solid at the same time. In physics, it's called a non-Newtonian liquid because it has a different viscosity. And what I was trying to do here is like I used these oscillations and these vibrations in order to refer to an echo to the work of Saint-Point. So somehow this material becomes another non-human body that has an agency on its own. And somehow it allowed me to echo the traces of Saint-Point's performances back in the 1930s. So somehow it was a way for me to reactivate the works of Saint-Point like today. And the same work was also my first group show after staying in Athens, and it was part of the Artworks Visual Arts Fellows of 2018. It was part of the group show and the Summer Nostos Festival is Stavros Niarchos Foundation in June 2019. And I want to close today this small presentation by sharing with you also an audio piece that I have created this summer as part of the exhibition Phenomena. Phenomena was a one-week program of contemporary art that took place in the island of Anafi. And it was in July 2021. And I thought it was a really interesting program because it invited different art spaces of Athens to actually curate different days of the exhibitions. So there were different art spaces like the 3137, there was the space called 8, there was Enterprise Project, the Island Club, and then the State of Concept in Athens. So for this event, I was commissioned by the art space State of Concept to create this work that I named Her Name. And it's a sound piece that actually looked at the idea of displacement, ektopisi in Greek, which actually reflected back to the dictatorship of Metaxa in the 1930s. And in this work, I was looking specifically the work of the anthropologist Margaret Kenna, who has worked a lot in the island of Anafi. And I found out that between 1938 and 1942, a number of women were displaced in Anafi. And most of them were like workers in factories of tobacco, or they were like in silk or craft enterprises. There was a teacher, and I realized that very little is actually known about their stories and their revendication in the feminist movement in Greece. So I have decided, as I felt that they were not just displaced in this island of Anafi in exile, but they were also somehow displaced from history. I wanted through this work to recall their names and their stories and to mark the traces in the island of Anafi. And I made this audio piece that lasts 20 minutes and recounts their biographies and recalls their names. And for that, I have also selected a soundtrack with songs of the period between the two world wars. There is a link here on my SoundCloud if you want to listen to the entire piece. And I will leave you with this small little extract with the Aegean Sea as well in the end. So it was, as it was exhibited in the island of Anafi in this beautiful palm tree. That's it for me, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, Maria. I think you can already, and certainly if you've been following the 4 weeks of exchanges, the call and responses, there are echoes today of many of the kinds of themes that have come up, and especially ideas around, confronting multiple forms of violence, trauma, exclusion, and finding ways to heal those kinds of wounds and in the face of those conditions, and feel a sense of joy and resilience in the wake of that history, in those histories. I, in the interest of time, and because I'm guessing that there are people who have questions in the audience, I just want to go to one prompt to hear a little bit from each artist, and that has to do with perhaps just taking a minute to reflect on the virtual format of this exchange. I mean, it's interesting that both of you are such, deeply embodied performance people, and the way in which we, of course, got to know one another was completely through Zoom, through Instagram, and through a kind of logic, especially of Instagram, that I think we were pushing against, which is not just to seize an instant and sort of show whatever is happening in that moment, which is usually what it's used for, or for promotional purposes, but rather to make public a relationship that was developing over the course of 4 weeks, not through a series of instances, but not stopping there. So I wonder if you could just take a minute to talk a little bit about, what was it like to discover things about one another when, in fact, you were having this very intimate call and response, but it was completely public simultaneously, which is, I think, an unusual sort of exchange. And I wonder what kind of a connection you felt you were able to achieve, because we all know what it's like when we actually meet people in person, or at least we remember. Now we're starting to remember now as the pandemic is waning a bit. But can you just reflect about that? Were there any surprises? What do you see as the potential of the future of this kind of exchange? I just wondered if you had any thoughts before we open to the audience for any questions they might have.
Yeah, I'll just say that it was quite beautiful. I think we had spoke about this in our trio meeting, but this is like the first time I really, and this sounds so weird to say, reflected on like a culmination of a lot of my works, which felt very vulnerable, that process. And then I guess simultaneously the act of like learning more about Maria through her work and through the way that she spoke about just like her practice and the way that she was processing, it felt very vulnerable for me. And it was interesting to have this kind of vulnerability take place in a digital like platform that like I'm not able to like actually see and like hug Maria. I don't know if you're a hugger, but like I felt like I wanted to do that, but I had to do it through words and kind of questions, and that was kind of the response that was happening for me. And the other thing I'll say about the kind of the platform and having everything happen on Instagram is that there's a lot of restrictions with Instagram. I know Maria and I spoke about the fact that we wanted to kind of link things so that we can explore more. And there was one instance which we spoke about where Maria wanted to link a song so that I can actually hear the words, but you put the lyrics in the text in the caption. And I remember reading it and started singing. So having these moments where I felt like that was like a really deep way to kind of connect and almost lean into the restriction as something that could kind of like force something beautiful to take place.
I totally would use the same word, vulnerable. I felt also like it was really a true exchange and a deep exchange of practice, but also of sensitivities, of senses, of pasts, of histories, of political emergencies. And this I really also, I learned a lot as well, talking with Leandra and observing the way she speaks about the work and the sensitivity and the honesty with which she approaches also her own body and the bodies that she creates through her work. And also I really enjoyed very much these conversations, even if I was very nomadic, and it was difficult because every time I was in a different place with the time difference. I mean, sometimes it was challenging, but yeah, I really enjoyed also these reflections and resonances from the different places I was also inhabiting as part of my nomadic few months. So yeah, that was definitely a discovery of how as well an online platform can turn into like an actual platform of like creation and exchange and yeah, and thinking as well a lot of like the word residency and how it was my first online residency, but also towards the end, after we got to know better each other, and then we started having ideas of like, let's use this to improvise, let's make performative actions, and I'm really glad that that led towards that direction, because I think, yeah, I think there is really the possibility, and also I thought that this is also like part of what a residency somehow could be or is, or so yeah, it really stretched and extended my understanding of what this could be, and I was very happily surprised.
Great. I see Sheila has a question. Sheila, do you want to unmic and perhaps say it? Oh, you're not, you're muted. Okay, I see there might be some technical difficulties here.
No, I was waiting for permission. I am now permitted to unmic. So I know that this format and this type of exchange was brought on by the pandemic, but in truth, it made a continental broad exchange happen, unlike some residencies, for a long period over time. And now remains for some of us a way to exchange beyond our national borders. And I wonder if you think about using this more in the future as a way to stay, to share intimate differences, but also to, I want to say, like, break national mythologies.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that that's a really great question, and one that certainly was coming up regularly, I think, for all of us as we participated in this, Sheila. I think there's also something about the fact that a lot of us who work internationally end up doing much of our process on Zoom. You know, it's always that kind of behind the curtain making of a project that, you know, is you get used to working across time zones and, you know, working through ideas, but it's never made visible in the same way that this did, this format did. And I really appreciate, as somebody who loves the messiness as you know, since we've worked together, of process and all that reveals, and how that actually takes you to places that you wouldn't have gone otherwise. I think there was something about the fact that it was, on the one hand, vulnerable, instantaneous, nonlinear, right? Because multisensory, moving between image and text and sound and video. And also, one of the things I loved about it was that it revealed the kind of nonlinearity of thinking much more, in that other artists from Ukraine, for example, or Brooklyn, or wherever it might be, could be brought into the conversation and made instantaneously available. So that I think it's really got a lot of potential for opening up new ways of working. I'm very excited by it, and I have to admit I'm quite dubious about the logic of Instagram generally. So it was a pleasure.
I'm wondering if Leandra has a take on it, because as Americans who are very American identified, there's less of, we tend to be like right here. And there's less thinking beyond our borders, our coasts, or the enormity of the American experience. And as a Black woman in America, just changing up that narrative a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it was quite beautiful to tap into Maria's experiences, and even the research that she's dived into in regards to what's taking place outside of my four walls in my space, or even the streets I navigate on a day-to-day. For me, that was kind of eye-opening around I guess I would say the connections that take place in regards to the experience. Even though it's different, there is still something that has this thread line, and this way that we can connect and kind of equate experiences and have better understandings of one another, outside of the dynamics that happen, right in our backyard. So that for me was really quite beautiful to experience. I found myself just listening more so. I mean, even, I don't know if Maria or Lydia, you noticed, but on a lot of calls, I would just kind of sit there and just quietly listen and maybe not say too much, because it was for me really quite informative to just hear the things that Maria had to say, and even Lydia, someone who has been in different spaces across the world. So that was quite beautiful for me.
Thank you.
I guess maybe I can share the ARCAthens point of view about continuing this format, Sheila. It began as a response to the pandemic, but from the beginning, we had aspirations to be able to create dialogue and support artists and curators on a digital platform, because we understood from the beginning how important a venue, how important a platform this could be. But because of our capacity, we're still a very small organization, and because of our focus on our physical residencies, it was an idea we wanted to develop, but it took a couple years, and it was a huge prompt by the pandemic. Meanwhile, we love this program. We're going to continue this program post-pandemic. I really loved hearing Leandra and Maria speak about how they were inspired to continue their dialogue beyond this residency. This is an affirmation of all the programs we've had so far, because all the fellows in the previous programs developed this kinship that they wanted to continue. So for us, this is a great motivation to continue this program way past the pandemic.
Thank you.
I wonder if there are other people who are chat shy, but maybe have a question. Oh, here's one here. Comment about it being inspiring. Thank you, Marianne. Anybody else have a question that they would like to ask? Lisa, were you waving your hand?
Yes, I'm a guest of Aristides and George, and I'm humbled to be here as the only non-artist. I'm deeply moved, and I was so parched, and I'm so moved to tears. I needed this desperately. Leandra, my soul is not blue in the negative, but it's blue because it has light now. And thank you both very much. I'm so inspired, and I'm humbly grateful to have been here. You really touched my soul and my life, and exactly what I needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Anyone else have any questions? It's always hard to look for body language on the screen. That's the one downside of this, not being in the same room and feeling the energy.
Lydia, there's a comment in the chat.
Oh, wonderful.
Observation.
Abby, do you want to unmic? Actually, Lisa, just so you know, there are a few people who are not artists in the room. Abby, you talked about. Go ahead.
I can unmic. Sure. I was really interested both of Maria and Leandra's work, touched a lot on the theme of duration, creating it, some patterns that need to be broken and changed, as well as the value of duration. I'm just curious if that was part of the dialogue between the two of you and sharing thoughts on that. I was really struck by that in both of your work.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Abby, for asking this question. I think, I think of duration a lot in what I'm doing, but also I think a lot of times is really something defined from the way the work is presented. So with the pandemic, it's interesting because a lot of the work going online, the way we started producing work and the way we are asked to perform the work in an online space creates a lot of different questions as well. So, for example, the piece that I shared with the audio piece that I have shared somehow turned out to be this 20-minute like audio work that I think is the somehow for spoken for a work that has like words and is narrated. I feel sometimes like 20 minutes is a lot of time for someone to sit and listen. And then, for example, I think a lot of like from where the audience, of course, is listening to this work. So as you saw, that was like on a very beautiful spot of the island of Anafi, so people could just sit on these benches and like look at the Aegean Sea. So of course, it's a very important thing to ask from where someone is listening. Now for the body work and the duration, I think, I mean, given that a lot of our understanding of like performing arts and live work has been actually paused for these past 2 years, there is a lot of work that has been produced with video, and actually for me that was a very interesting way of rethinking of my work, and exchanging with Leandra also was made me, it was very inspiring because the way she's using video and the way, I mean, the fact that video is very present in the way you make your work, I think is something really interesting that somehow I take it as something very positive coming out of these 2 very strange years with no live work, and especially here in Athens as well. It has been, I mean, it has been very, very difficult to make anything really that involved like live bodies into like spaces. So basically all the work in the theaters and everything have been greatly affected. I don't know if I have answered your question, but I think I am answering from the current moment in time and how to think of duration actually in these days.
Yeah, I'll just add like a tiny bit to that. I think it was interesting thinking about the duration of the residency, and like the final week, our theme was undo. And so thinking about like we were kind of doing the structure during the residency, and then the final week we just were like, we don't want to do this structure. We just kind of want to do what feels good in the moment. And that I think like speaks to like how we're going to kind of continue. We talked a lot about like how we can bridge the gap between like obviously the residency kind of ending, but like thinking about this ending not as an actual ending, but something that continues on. So I think when I'm thinking of duration, I mean, obviously it exists in our works, but I'm thinking of the duration of like how we communicate and continue to stay in contact and I guess in just community with one another, which feels lifelong now. So yeah, I'm grateful for this as like kind of a spark to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also we have this very nice calendar now that as the end of the project of this residency, I have created this very humble note calendar. So I wanted through noting, making these small notes into the string to actually mark time differently, and the time we spend with Leandra and Lydia, the time before our meetings, in between our meetings, or after our meetings. So yeah, just to bring that in as well, because that is another way of also understanding duration and time.
Thank you. I hope that if you enjoyed today, and it seems that many of us were very moved. I know I was, to continue in the spirit of what we've been developing in the last 4 weeks. But also, an invitation to go back and look again at some of the postings, because this was just the tip of the iceberg if you haven't been following along. So you can learn a lot more about all these practices in that way. But I want to thank everybody, and I want to turn this back over to Eleni, who as our host, to close us out.
Thank you, Lydia. I want to say that this was a wonderful conversation, and you have been so generous with your time, but also energetically and emotionally. I think we all felt it. And I think, Lydia, you have an amazing instinct because you seem to enjoy each other's company so much. And everyone here doesn't want this to end, but we'll have to. If you enjoyed the program, it will be wonderful if you fill out the survey. I will put it on the chat. And Aristides, before we close, do you have any updates about the upcoming events or projects of ARCAthens? Is there something that you would like to add?
Yeah, I just needed to unmute myself. Thank you, dear Lydia, Leandra, and Maria for a spectacular residency and this extremely engaging synopsis. It's been such a pleasure to see your dialogue blossom in this month. And thank you, Eleni, Riga, Paula, and our board of directors, and everybody on the team, without whose passionate support to our programming, this would not be possible. And thank you to all the attendees and all your wonderful questions. You made this a wonderful conversation. I'd like to take a moment here and announce that we have a curator for the AVR6. And Sheila, this also addresses your question about continuing this program. We're really excited. Our curator is currently in search of the visual artists that will participate. And the next AVR, the 6th one, is scheduled for July. Also, applications are now open for our physical Athens residency, which will resume in September. We're beyond excited to return to our physical programming, so please encourage any qualified curators or artists to apply. If you're not on our mailing list, please visit our website at ARCAthens.org to join. And while you're there, please visit our website support page to make an easy, safe, and tax-deductible gift. to ensure we can continue with our programming. Thank you again to our fellows, our team, and you for supporting us. Have a safe, healthy, and wonderful spring.
We will unmute everyone so we can all say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Great program.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Some say thank you.
Yes, Aristide.
Yes, Aristide. Aristide.
Little Aristide,
Aristide.
being shy.
I
Hi.
think Aristide too. Thank you, everybody. That was absolutely phenomenal.